Hello, my name is Jonathan Arriaga, and I have a question for you. What if we didn't have the internet? If you think about it, humans have always tried to find better and more efficient ways to speak to each other, to communicate, from sending letters on horseback or through mail, to the invention of the telephone, where all we have to do is dial a number and we're speaking to the person we want to talk to the radio, which allows us to send broadcasts to speak to hundreds of people, to today, with the internet, where all it takes is a keyboard and mouse, and you can speak to the world in an instant. I'd like to speak to you about what it'd be like without it. People think of the internet as this recent thing that before my generation there was no internet, but little do people know that it's been over 50 years in the making. It all started in the Cold War in 1957 when the Soviet Union actually successfully launched Sputnik into orbit. This caused a lot of fear for Americans, as they thought that the Soviets were technologically more advanced than us, and that this would cause them to win the Cold War. This fear drove Americans to focus on scientific research, and this caused the government to create two new agencies, NASA and ARPA, in order to focus more on their weapons, their rocketry, and their computers. Now, I mentioned that because ARPA would then create ARPANET, which during the Cold War they were afraid that the Soviets, if they launched one missile, could take out the entire network for telephones, effectively cutting off communication between each other. And their idea was, what if they could create a network of wires that connected each computer? That way, even if the telephones went out, we could still communicate with each other. This idea would be improved over time into more and more networks with improvements such as information packets to better send the information. And this would keep going until about 1991, when Switzerland introduced the World Wide Web. And that is the internet that we know today. Now let's talk about if the internet never was invented. If ARPA couldn't create ARPANET, or came up with the idea to connect computers to communicate, would the Soviet Union create it instead? Would some other scientist somewhere think of the idea? If not, how would the world change? I mean, if America wasn't driven enough to go further in science, the Soviet Union would have won. The world would have been different. But let's look at it from today's standpoint. If we didn't have the internet today, we wouldn't have a lot of the luxuries that we currently take for granted, such as our smartphones, which need internet to function for the most part, or our video game consoles that need internet to play with others, to communicate. And on that note, where would our communication be? Would we still need to send messages over telephone lines or through radio? How would that affect the world? If the internet didn't exist, we wouldn't have as much information at hand as we normally would. Granted, we could always go to a library and find research studies, but that takes time and not everyone's willing to do that. Whereas with the internet, I can just go on Google and look up any bit of information that I previously wouldn't have access to. The world would be massively different without the internet. I think we all need to think about that a little bit more in the future.